Okay. Magandang hapon po, good morning, good afternoon, good evening everyone. Nasaan man po kayo sa parte ng mundo. Welcome to the 71st installment of the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series. And thank you for being part of our credible online community. To all of those who have just discovered us for today, welcome po at we are sure that you will enjoy being part of our community. So for today, we will be talking about booster shots. Araw-araw po na sa ating mga balita, ito po ay napag-uusapan. Ano po ba ang alam natin tungkol sa mga COVID-19 booster shots? Should we be receiving additional doses of COVID-19 vaccines? Gaano po ba katagal ang mga current vaccines po natin na napoproteksyonan po tayo laban sa severe disease and hospitalization? Are all the current vaccines providing adequate protection against the Delta variant na very dreaded po? So, teka muna, aalamin po natin for today the science behind the COVID-19 vaccine boosters. So, if you want to cut through all of the noise, yung pong mga disinformation, misinformation, and really get the answers from credible sources, then this is the place to be. I'm Dr. Raymond Francis Sarmiento, Director of National Telehealth Center, National Institutes of Health, University of the Philippines, Manila. Always a pleasure to be with all of you during our regular Friday lunch date. And as always, get to enjoy our Fridays kasi po I share hosting duties with my partner and my beloved mentor po, our adjunct research faculty at the National Telehealth Center, international renowned public health communications expert, Dr. Susie Pineda Mercado. Dr. Susie?
Hi Raymond, good afternoon. Ganda naman ng introduction. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat sa mga nakikinig from all over the country. Welcome and nice to see everyone who's usually here. Raymond, pagka maaga pa nakakapag-chat ako sa mga maagang pumasok. Nagtataka yung iba, ba't kami hindi binabati? Kasi pag nag-start na mahirap nang mag-chat. Pero magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat, saan man kayo naroon. We hope you're okay. We hope you're fine. We know that many of you are getting infected. Many of your family members are getting infections. Salamat na lang sa Diyos, ang karamihan ay mild asymptomatic. Dun sa man na nagkakaroon ng mga serious condition, our hearts are with you. We know that it's very difficult to be a health worker in these times. Pero tuloy lang tayo, tuloy lang, at matatapos din to. And our topic today is very interesting. We're going to talk about booster. Ano ba yung booster shot na yan? Diba? Ano ba yung ibig sabihin yan? Right now, I think we will focus on the science. Anong prinsipyo bakit natin kailangan magbigay ng booster, no? And we have a very fascinating group of speakers. Again, only the best for you guys. Thank you for joining us. Kung hindi po sa inyo, hindi po namin maipapagpatuloy ito, no? Ginaganahan talaga kami pag nakikita namin, bumabalik sila, nandyan lang sila. So also those who have watch parties, if you're in a watch party, let us know on the chat or send us a picture on Facebook. Okay, so to start our discussion, and we're going to talk about ano nga ba yung booster shot. We have a very special animation from TVUP. So TVUP, take it away.
Ang protective immunity ay nabubuo pagkatapos ng infeksyon o sa unang turok ng bakuna. Ngunit, bakit kailangan natin ng dagdag na turok ng bakuna? Magkakaiba ang reaksyon ng ating immune system sa bawat infeksyon. May ilan na mahina at nawawala na lang paglipas ng panahon. Ganoon din sa mga bakuna. Kaya, kailangan ng mga dagdag na turok nito. Kinakailangan natin ng mga dagdag na turok ng bakuna para mapalakas ang proteksyon na nakukuha natin dito. At para sa mga bakuna na hindi nakakapagbigay ng panghabang buhay na proteksyon, kinakailangan natin ng booster vaccine. Mahalagang magpabakuna taon-taon upang labanan ang mga virus na mabilis na nag-mutate o nagbabago. Kinakailangan ng ating katawan ng panahon upang lumikha ng pinakamahusay na immune memory. kung kaya't may pagitan sa unang turok ng bakuna at sa mga susunod nito. Kadalasan, nagkakaroon ng mas magandang reaksyon kapag mas mahaba ang pagitan ng bawat turok ng bakuna. Hinahayaan nito ang ating immune system na bumuo ng malakas na immune memory para ang booster vaccine ay magkakaroon ng pinakaangkop na boosting effect.
Thank you so much, TVUP Raymond. Ang ganda, no?
Sinagalog.
Congratulations to TVUP. We have really these brilliant young creative artists in TVUP who put this together. And of course, our director, Chancellor Gigi Alfonso. Thank you for...
Voice over.
Ang ganda. May mga violin pa sa likod, Raymond. Parang very, what should I say? It's a very calming video. But I think animation is really a very good medium, especially for understanding very complicated processes. No? So congratulations and thank you, TVUP. Hoping there will be more in the future. Over to you, Raymond.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Susie, and thank you also for that excellent video. No, we just showed that an English version of that video last Monday. So thank you for really working very, very hard on this, TVUP. We are now numbering at a little over 1,100 participants in the Zoom webinar. So for those who are joining us sa YouTube channel ng TVUP as well as the Facebook accounts ng Stop COVID Deaths, University of the Philippines as well as TVUP, please let us know if you are in the watch parties po so we could acknowledge each and every one of you. Please remember that our Zoom webinar can accommodate up to 3,000 participants. And hopefully you'll be able to join us in Zoom so you could fully experience the interactive program. So for those who may not be able to join or baka mas madali po sa kanila na mag-join through other platforms, as mentioned, we are sharing especially the experience through our Mentimeter. So yung pong ating nasa Zoom, sa Zoom poll, sa mga outside of the Zoom, please go to www.menti.com and enter the code 7828-1242. That's 7828-1242. So you'll be able to join in our fun mini quiz. And for those who are asking, our certificates of attendance will be given to those who have watched at least 50% of the webinar duration. Ang ating mga very, very hardworking team behind it po, no? Will be showing, will be answering all of your queries. Please direct all your queries to stopcoviddeaths@up.edu.ph. As mentioned, only those who have spent at least 50% of the time sa webinar will be given certificates of attendance po. And that's something that we have been very, very consistent as well as to make sure na inyong mga names na nasa registration po, ayun po talaga ang magre-reflect sa inyong mga certificates. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond. So we're really looking forward to a very exciting webinar today. And I assure you, we have really top-notch speakers for this webinar. So Raymond, are we going to... Mag-launch na ba tayo ng Mentimeter? Mukhang ikaw ang introduction, di ba?
Ay, okay. Sige. Yeah, just to give a very, very brief opening remarks po, no, for our webinar. We have been talking about COVID-19 boosters for the past month. We are waiting for experts from the vaccine expert panel, from the Health Technology Assessment Council, our experts from the National Adverse Event Following Immunization Committee, as well as our Interim National Immunization Technical Advisory Group, and all other experts to chime in and give their position with regards to the giving of the COVID-19 boosters po. We are looking at really all of the evidence that's available to be able, ano po ba yung science behind giving a series of vaccinations, difference between a primary series and a booster series, how do all of these protect people from viral infections including COVID-19. For today's webinar, we'll also want to discuss the evidence supporting all of the additional doses. Meron po ba talaga ebidensya? And does the evidence support the claim na dapat po ba ay magkaroon na tayo ng booster shots? You will note, especially for those who are reading the news, Israel has been moving forward with their booster shots. There are those, at least in the United States, approval for the elderly and for the immunocompromised. So yun po yung mga iba't ibang elemento, ano po ba yung mga groups, priority groups of people who would be eligible and would be recommended to receive a booster shot. We also would hopefully touch on the World Health Organization's concerns with regards to equity of the vaccines. Bakit po ba importante na masigurado na lahat po ng mga tao ay makareceive ng at least one vaccine? You will note na the WHO has been harping on the fact that a lot of the vaccines, majority of the vaccines have been distributed among the developed countries and a very, very small portion has been received by the developing countries. So yun po ang ating pag-uusapan for today's webinar. Okay, over to you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond. Ganda ng introduction mo. No? Parang sabi ko nga, no, so many issues around booster shots. At the moment, I think we are really focused on making sure that everybody at least gets one shot, all those who are eligible. No? So nandun pa tayo. Pero maganda nang iniintindi natin, lalo na ating audience are mainly frontliners. Baka natatanong kayo, or baka nag-iisip din kayo, kailangan nyo ba? Okay, so ito ay pag-aralan muna natin kung ano ba yung booster shot na yan, kung paano siya nakakatulong not only for COVID-19 but other viral infections. So we're going to start first with our fun quiz. So we always start with konting audience participation, Raymond, di ba? So Raymond, let's go to our fun quiz muna before we introduce our panel.
Okay, thank you so much. We are seeing, at least for those who are in the Zoom, the opinion poll. And then on the screen, there we go. Uy, may bago na naman tayong pakulo. Very, very cute pictures sa ating Mentimeter. Okay. Doon po sa doon po sa ating mga nasa Facebook ulit or YouTube, please note that if you could join us sa www.menti.com and enter the code 78281242, you'd be able to join our fun mini quiz. We only have 2 questions as always. Very first question natin, a booster is, so ano po ba ang booster? Pili lang po kayo ng isa. Option A, additional dose. It's an additional dose given after the primary series. Option B, given immediately after the second dose if the person has comorbidities. Option C, given to the elderly population. Option D, lahat ng nabanggit. So yun po. We are seeing, ang galing no, para pong para siyang ano ba to? Parang you're peering down under a microscope, Dr. Susie. Kaya ang galing.
Ang cute niya. Sige.
It's very, very dynamic. Thank you, TVUP, for this one. And then for our second question, the second question reads, the evidence of effectiveness of booster shots for COVID-19 vaccines is letter A, not available. Letter B, consistently increasing the antibodies. Letter C, inconsistent. And letter D, confusing. So we are talking about the evidence of effectiveness, no? Ano po ba yung mga sinasabi ng ebidensya tungkol po sa booster vaccine? So we will not be closing our opinion poll. But we'd like to greet po muna ang ating mga registrants all the way from Manila District Hospital in Manila, Quirino, from Mariveles Mental Wellness and General Hospital in Bataan, from Industrial Technology Development Institute, from DOST in Taguig, Lambunao Rural Health Unit in Iloilo, the Provincial Government of Negros Occidental in Bacolod, and internationally, the Parkway Hospital in Singapore, Chonin Hospital in Taipei, Taiwan, Ministry of Health in Oman, Lunichi Ali University of Blida 2 in Algeria, Penang, Malaysia, Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, Dubai, UAE, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, San Jose, California, the University of Fiji, Lautoka, and finally, ang ating pinakabago, Inisfail, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Queensland, Australia. So maraming salamat po. We are now numbering nearly 1,300. So hopefully a whole lot more of your friends and families and colleagues will be able to join. Again, we will not be closing the opinion poll as we move on to our webinar proper. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond. And thank you, TVUP. I really enjoy those growing microbes for the Mentimeter. Very cute. Okay, so we are going to our main speakers. So today we have a number of speakers, and the first is someone you have met before, but we always like to invite her because she is the lead of the vaccine expert panel. I mean, doesn't get any better than that to have this expert with us. She's former Dean of the UP College of Public Health, and she's always game to join us and give us very, what should I say, very clear explanations of the science behind vaccines. So let's go to Dr. Nina Gloriani. Dr. Nina, welcome to the webinar again.
Yes, thank you very much, Doc Susie, and a very beautiful afternoon to everyone. Sa mga followers ng TVUP. Happy to be here again, no? Very happy.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you for joining us. Sige po,
Thank
go
you
ahead.
po,
Go ahead with your presentation.
Okay. So you have seen the the beautiful animation. That should set the tone for my presentation. Ay, ba't nawala?
Ma'am, lipat po kayo sa ano?
Just click on something, Dr. Nina. Yun po. And then,
Go to presentation.
sige po.
Ayun, slideshow. Go to slideshow, ma'am.
Yan, okay.
Yun, okay. Thank you.
Nice.
We have been required to have our disclosure. So I have no financial disclosure or conflicts of interest to disclose with regard to the subject matter of this presentation and all others here. Okay. True love lasts forever. Totoo ba yun? May forever nga ba? Well, for some, yes. But immunity to COVID-19 vaccines will not last forever. Sorry, Anyway, but let me define first at least these two terms, the primary series of vaccines versus the booster. By primary series of vaccines, we mean the dose and number of doses determined usually during clinical trials. Ito po yung data that will show na ito yung optimal. So, a series of vaccine doses, pwedeng 1 lang or 2 to 4 doses, mahaba na yung 4, to reach full effectiveness of these vaccines. So, if you remember or if you know, may children kayo, grandchildren, ang OPV for polio requires 3 doses, MMR 2 doses, yung flu vaccine 1 dose yearly. But for the COVID vaccines that we have available right now, isa lang po yung merong 1 dose na binibigay and all others will require 2 doses. So now we move to defining what is a booster dose, at least for this presentation. No? We refer to a 3rd dose or additional dose to the primary series. So nabigyan na nung nando, no? 3, 2, then we add another 1. So for some vaccines, a booster dose is needed months or years after the primary dose to refresh the immune system's memory and maintain protection. So itong mga naka-examples po dito, mayroon po talaga mga booster doses yan. But for COVID-19, do we need boosters? Masasagot po natin yan mamaya. So just to give you an idea, ito po yung for routine vaccines. Makikita nyo, yan, may mga check. Kaya ilang doses ba yan? And then after so many months or many years, you have boosters. So, kasi partial protection or maybe even no protection yet after 1 dose, which we just call priming dose, or 2 to 3 dose primary series, and then you get higher or full protection after completion of what we call the primary series, but which will vary for different vaccine antigens. Okay. So let us understand why some will require boosters, others will not. So there is individual variation in immune response to vaccination. So I have listed here a number of these factors. So ang unang-una siguro is intrinsic host factors, yung age. Sino ba ang mas madaling maka-generate ng immune response? The younger, the middle age, or the older? Sex, may genetics of the immune response, then those who have comorbidities or are immunocompromised may have lower immune responses. And then we do have our behavioral as well as nutritional factors. Now, this is only for children, or may mga factors din to consider. Among the extrinsic factors, we also have to consider, for example, pre-existing immunity. In the case of COVID, we have to look at natural immunity, yung na-COVID. And then, do we give vaccine pa ba or what do we do? And then, these are for the host factors. These are for vaccine and administration factors. So, we have to look at different vaccine types, the product, the vaccine itself, kung meron silang adjuvant or what, the dose, yung concentration of antigen in that formulation, and then the number of doses in the primary series, And especially the interval between doses. You will see later, 2 weeks ba ang interval between the first and second doses? May 3 weeks, may 4 weeks, may 8 to 12 weeks. Mayroon pang ibang vaccines, not for COVID, 5 to 6 months or longer. So these factors will make your immune responses vary, no? So iba-iba. So we're looking at different quality and types of antibody responses. For instance, so meron tayong tinatawag na IgM, IgA, IgG, meron tayong neutralizing versus non-neutralizing antibodies. We also look at cell-mediated immunity. Meron tayong T helper, meron tayong killer or cytotoxic T cells. Not just the quality, but we have to look at the quantity. Gaano kadami yung na-elicit na immune response ninyo. For antibodies, we're always looking at titer. So ito yung magnitude. Mas mataas na titer, of course, better. And that translates to a longer duration of immunity, which could be weeks, months, or years. Now, this is something I will explain again some more later, but over time, and with 2 or 3 or 4 boosters or doses, there will be an increase. This is an immunologic phenomenon or immunologic based on immunologic principles. There will be increase in potency, avidity to yung total binding ng antibody sa lahat ng mga antigenic epitopes ng isang virus, for instance, yung affinity maturation. Nagmamature din yung strength ng binding niya habang tumatagal, no, yung interval dun sa from the time you get the vaccine, and increasing the breadth of the immune response, meaning nagiging broadly reactive yung antibodies. Okay, siguro I'll just explain in more detail what does dosage requirement mean. So yung number of doses kasi medyo iba-iba nga, no? So for primary immunization, example ko dito is for COVID, no? So for 1 dose, meron tayo yung Janssen. This 1 dose may provide enough immunity and afford up to 70% protection. So you see this graph here, no? Pag 1 dose, this is what sort of antibody response you will get. But for other COVID vaccines, they will require 2 doses like Pfizer, Moderna, Sputnik, Sinovac, sino pa ba? Okay, baka may nakalimutan ako. So pag nag-second dose ka, that will shoot up. I will explain again. Dahil meron tayong memory response, that is what we call a secondary response. So 1 dose versus 2 doses. The spacing between doses, as I already explained earlier, will also be important. So different vaccines use different schedules. Yung 3 weeks ang Pfizer and Sputnik, I think have yung interval of 3 weeks between the first and second doses. Ang 4 weeks apart ay ang Sinovac, Moderna, Covaxin, I think. And then AstraZeneca ang has the data on the longest interval, 4 weeks to 12 weeks. So actually, AstraZeneca gave data on the higher levels of antibodies when the interval between the first and second doses was longer, up to 12 weeks. So actually, meron pa silang ibang data na longer than 12 weeks na mas mataas pa yung antibody response. So thus, the need for booster doses after primary series will depend on the duration of immunity, which could wane in months or in years. If short-lived immunity, we may need to give boosters. So ito yung pag tinuturo po sa mga estudyante, I think a lot of your healthcare workers here, you're into immunology class. So ito yung primary versus secondary immune response. Ito yung first exposure, first dose sa inyo. So we call that the primary response, which is short-lasting, mabilis siyang bababa. It is smaller in magnitude, mas mababa yung level of antibodies. But that is the time when the switch from what we call IgM to IgG would occur. So mag-uumpisa na dyan yung tinatawag nating memory response. So now when we give the second dose, yan yung secondary response. So meron tayong na-generate na memory cells from the first dose. So the memory cells developed from primary response are activated very quickly. So makikita nyo dito in siguro a few days, 5 to 7 days, papanik agad yung mga antibodies niya. Mabilis ang response na yan. So faster response, also more pronounced, kaya kikita nyo mas mataas, taas ng titer. higher magnitude or titer of antibodies, at mas mataas, longer ang duration ng immunity. And repeated exposure, you may have a second, a third, a fourth, leads to faster, stronger response, more effective at limiting the infection. Okay. Yung mga antibodies na yan, saan ba galing? No? They come from the B cells which become plasma cells. So this is a little technical, but what I want you to appreciate here is, itong mga antibodies na to, galing nga sa B cells. So the level of antibodies you get will depend on how many B cells divide into so many plasma cells later, no, para to produce those antibodies. So meron tayong tinatawag na clonal expansion. Ito yung clone ng against one antigen of the COVID, of the spike, for instance. No? Magko-clonally expand yan, so dadami. Ibig sabihin ng clonal expansion, yung isang B cell magiging dalawa, yung dalawa magiging apat, walo. It is exponential. Then as you go along, so, una, andito yung recognition. Mare-recognize muna ng B cell yung inyong antigen, let us say the spike. Then ma-activate siya to clonally proliferate, dadami. Kaya tinan nyo, padami ng padami yan, expand ng expand. And what we have seen is that more B cells clonally expand with time and with longer interval between doses. So more plasma cells will be there, with dividing, and therefore the plasma cells are the ones producing the antibodies, and as you go along, hanggang tumatagal yung time na yon, merong tinatawag na affinity maturation. So parang di sa tao habang nagmamature, natatagalan, no? Yung affinity of binding of the antibody to the viral antigen, and then may na-generate na memory. So yung sasabi ko, no, more antibodies produced with stronger affinity, therefore, there is wisdom in waiting for the right time to boost. Hindi po pwedeng agad-agad. Yan. This is another maybe techie or basic slide, but what I want also you to understand is, ito po mga vaccines natin, usually ang meron tayo, either the whole virus inactivated vaccine or the spike. But within the spike alone, marami pong tinatawag na B-cell antigenic epitopes. So hindi lang po isa yan, marami yan. At naaral yan, kaya nga po nagkakaroon ng immune evasion sa variants kasi naiiba yung mga antigens na yon dahil doon sa mga mutations na yon. But without the mutations muna, there are so many such B-cell epitopes. So marami, and that means ito, no, there are so many depicted here by different colors of antigens. And for each antigenic epitope, there will be an antibody that will be generated against that. So this is a very good article that was recently published as a preprint. Pero tuwang-tuwa ako kasi actually there are many such publications on other vaccines. What this is showing here is, ito yung Wang et al. Just released September 5, no? The profiles of antibodies from those who received 3 doses, those who received 2 doses, and those who had yung antibodies after they recovered from COVID. Ito yung convalescent sera. So these antibodies were dissected very, very comprehensively. So what did that show? Doon sa after the 3rd dose, hindi ko napapakita yung mga 2 doses. Doon sa yung naka-receive ng 3rd dose, they produce a highly shifted humoral immune response. So meron pong na-evolve na antibodies. Yung sabi ko nga, iba-iba yung mga antibodies na yan. That showed better neutralization breadth, so mas marami, especially also seen against the variants of concern. They also, of course, showed quick memory response and yung higher titer dahil boosting long-lasting immune response in warding off COVID-19. So actually, they were able to analyze, napakarami po nito, hindi ito madaling i-analyze, 171 complex structures of SARS-CoV-2 neutralizing antibodies which identified, ito kunwari ito, iba-iba yan sila. Identified structure activity correlates, so yung nakakabit ng mga antigen at antibody, pinag-aralan po mabuti yan, that revealed very potent variant of concern, resistant, and broad spectrum antigenic patches. So ito po ay medyo technical pero ito po ay tinuturo natin sa immunology sa graduate school. Talaga pong yung mga antibodies ay naiiba-iba over time. There is a lot of memory B-cell clonal turnover. So yung siguro yung antibody composition changes in the B-cell repertoire which is driven by prolonged repeated antigenic stimulation such as what you would find after a third dose or an additional dose. So, given that, to boost or not to boost, that is the big question. Hanggang ngayon, balikan natin. Ito, nandito kayo. Some of you may have received 1 dose. Some of you may have received 2 doses. So ito, immune response better. Sinabi ko na that the interval, the longer the interval between the 2 doses, better. But, tignan ninyo, kung yung second dose nyo pababa na o mas mababa pa, then you have to consider a booster. Then there, you have some considerations for boosters. So waning immunity ba? We are looking at risk groups. Sila yung talagang mas malimit, maaga mag-wane ng immunity, the elderly, the immunocompromised, but not just the waning immunity, but those at very high exposure risk. Yung mga talagang tumitingin ng mga COVID patients or yung mga frontliners, no? Kailangan makita lahat yon. Then we have to look at the epidemiology of breakthrough cases over time and the disease severity. So pag may mga variants, then performance, we also have to look at the data ng mga vaccines for COVID. Kung may data sila on how their third dose will perform or have performed. So yung looking at the safety and immunogenicity of the, not just the immunogenicity, dumami ba yung antibody, but is a third dose safe? Titignan din po natin yun. And then pwede bang mag-mix and match? Ano yung mix and match? Yung first 2 doses ay one platform and then the booster, the third could be another platform. And then there are also recent studies on dose sparing or lower doses given as boosters. For instance, mayroong isang vaccine na kalahati lang nung dose na binibigay sa primary series ang binigay sa booster, and that was also very good. So question is, what is the optimal timing for boosters? Is it 6 months, 8 months, 12 months? It will depend. So, sorry na medyo anticlimactic ang aking last slide. But despite saying all that, we have to remember that the WHO officials say that the scientific justification for boosters remains unclear. Ang dami pong dapat kino-consider. So, Director General Tedros acknowledged that third doses might be necessary for at-risk groups. But he said, we do not want to see widespread use of boosters for healthy people and who are fully vaccinated. The WHO target is for all countries to vaccinate at least 40% of their people by year's end. And in fact, the WHO called for a global moratorium on booster doses at least sana initially until the end of September. Lapit na po noon, pero ang baba pa rin ang global immunization coverage. So this was later moved to end of 2021 to prioritize vaccinating the most at-risk people around the world who are yet to receive their first dose. And just to give you an idea of the countries who are planning on giving boosters or are already giving boosters, we have here listed Israel, nasa third dose sila, although narinig ko, gusto pa nila mag-fourth dose. US, UK, Czech Republic, Germany, France, Thailand, Indonesia, China, Cambodia. So with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That's former Dean of the UP College of Public Health, Dr. Nina Gloriani, who's also the lead of the vaccine expert panel, and a very clear explanation. Naisip ko nga, Ma'am Nina, no? Parang yung memory, parang ano, yung like our ordinary memory, no? Habang inuulit, di ba, pag bata pa kayo sasabihin ng nanay nyo, oh, dapat ganito, dapat ganyan. Tapos hindi nyo pa rin gagawin, kailangan paalala sa inyo. No? So habang pinapaalala, nagkakaroon ng memory, nagkakaroon tayo ng memory, ganun din yung mga cells natin sa katawan. So it's a very simple concept, but it's an important one because at the end of the day, it's not about what vaccine you're using, but about is your body remembering? Naaalala ba ng mga cells nyo? No? So thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Nina Gloriani. Okay, Raymond, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Susie, and thank you, Dr. Gloriani, for really making sure that everyone understands the science behind the booster shots in comparison to the primary series po. Our next speaker will be talking about the available evidence with regards to COVID-19 booster shots. She is a professor at the Institute of Clinical Epidemiology of the National Institutes of Health, University of Philippines, Manila. Please welcome to the webinar again, Dr. Marie Carmela Lapitan. Ma'am Mela.
Hello, good afternoon, good day to everyone, good night even to all the others. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share our work at the Institutes of Clinical Epidemiology from the National Institutes of Health of UP Manila. So let me just start sharing my slides. Okay, so Professor Gloriani has eloquently explained how vaccines and boosters work in protecting us from disease. But for the COVID-19 infection, the trials on the COVID-19 vaccines have demonstrated that they work in preventing disease. And as we see in the real world, it really, and as we continue to roll out our vaccination program, we've seen that it really does protect us from the disease. But as for the case of the COVID-19 vaccine booster, beyond what theoretically should happen, is there really proof that it will give us additional protection without giving us an additional risk? So let's see if in the next few minutes we can have a little bit more light on the COVID-19 vaccine boosters and looking at what is the current available evidence. Well, I will really be presenting our work of a group of researchers of the Philippine COVID-19 Living CPG Task Force of the Institute of Clinical Epidemiology of the UP NIH on the evidence that we have gathered on COVID-19 boosters and other important pieces of evidence that we share with our decision makers on how and when and is it really at the right time and should we implement a booster program here in our country anytime soon. So let's first I'll present to you the results of the rapid review that we've done on the evidence on COVID-19 vaccine boosters. So we we did a focused and directed search of these different electronic registries of COVID-19 studies and information to answer two basic questions. Are COVID-19 vaccine boosters effective and are they safe? So as of September 17, and actually I did a quick search the other day, this is still the numbers now, we found 21 reports really that discussed or looked at the performance of COVID-19 vaccine boosters. 11 of them gave information regarding the booster performance on the general population, and 10 showed the information regarding its performance on the immunocompromised. So let's look at studies that involve the general population. The studies reporting on the immunologic outcomes after COVID-19 booster vaccination actually showed very consistent results. All these booster vaccines did show significant increases in the antibody titers. When you compare them with the titers after the second dose, some even rising to about 100-fold rise in the titers. So this was what Professor Gloriani has said, that the booster will should increase the levels of your antibodies again. But more importantly, rather than just looking at antibodies, do they really prevent infection or give you additional protection? There are only 2 studies, and unfortunately, they were just observational studies that provided actual clinical outcomes after a booster. And this was These two studies both used the BNT162b2 or the Pfizer vaccine. No? The first study was a test negative case control study, and the second was a comparative cohort. Both studies were done in Israel. So the first study showed that the marginal protection against testing positive for SARS-CoV-2 increased to about 84% after 14 days after the booster compared to without receiving a booster. And then the comparative study, comparative cohort, on the other hand, showed that receiving a booster provided an 11.4-fold increase in protection against COVID-19 infection and an even higher 15.5-fold increase in protection against severe disease. Now, let's look at the impact of boosters on the immunocompromised population. Again, the same immunogenic effect was seen after COVID-19 booster vaccination among the immunocompromised. Now, the antibody titers and the seropositivity rates consistently increased after these immunocompromised patients received the booster shot. Now, what about actual clinical outcomes? No? In terms of the actual ability of the boosters to prevent infection, 3 single cohort studies on transplant patients reported only 1 COVID infection across these 3 studies after the boost. However, these studies did not really tell us what was the post vaccination infection rates before they had the booster. But more important outcomes or performance outcome was seen in this one report among patients who were on dialysis. It gives us a clearer picture on the effect of the booster when this study showed no breakthrough infections among within the months of after receiving the booster compared to the 4 symptomatic cases that they've seen within the first 3 weeks of receiving the primary vaccination. So to answer now the question, are COVID vaccine boosters safe? No, the studies reporting safety outcomes show that at least within 28 days of receiving the boost, although you can have, well, of course, expectedly, there's a higher rate of local and systemic reactions when you compare the boosted population compared to those who just received placebo. But most of these reactions were found to be mild and transient. But when you compare the rates, adverse reaction rates during the time of the second dose and the booster, some studies even actually showed lower adverse event rates after the booster. Although generally most of the studies reported similar adverse event rates. Now, in terms of the more important severe and serious adverse events, the studies that reported these showed very low rates or even no serious adverse event rates, and majority of them, if not all, were unrelated to the booster. And for the immunocompromised, there was no instance of acute rejection in the transplant patients who received the booster. Now, looking at homologous versus heterologous boosters. So what if you get boosted with another type of vaccine compared to your primary vaccination? The 3 studies that looked at this show that heterologous booster vaccination was actually associated with a higher local and systemic reaction, but still most of them were still just mild and moderate adverse events. So when we summarize the available evidence, we considered also not just the results, but also the quality of the studies that gave these results, the types of outcomes they reported, whether they were consistent in their results across, and whether their results were precise, so that we can see now the overall certainty. How sure are we that these studies actually answer our questions? Now, we see here the summary of findings of the effectiveness of booster vaccines among the general population. The certainty, how sure are we of the evidence that these studies gave us? We had to downgrade, mainly because most of the studies are observational studies, and those who actually did perform randomized trials most of them just showed immunogenic outcomes and not real clinical outcomes. But the same was true with the safety outcomes naman. The reason for us downgrading the certainty of the evidence is because nearly all, actually all of the studies except for one, had only very short follow-up of about 28 days. Now, the similar summary of findings we see among the studies that were generated from involving immunocompromised patients. Again, most of them were observational studies, and of course, these are just indirect measures of effectiveness, because again, most of them just showed antibody titers, and very few and very low quality studies did tell us the actual clinical outcomes of the booster vaccine among the immunocompromised patients. So the rapid review that we've done so far, at least the ones that we've done for as of today, showed that COVID-19 vaccine boosters are effective in preventing COVID-19 infections, but these are based on very low to low certainty evidence, and they are safe, again, based on moderate evidence. But safety and efficacy of the boosters is just one part of the puzzle. The WHO and most regulatory authorities actually look at other pieces of evidence to inform the decision of whether to roll out COVID-19 booster vaccination programs. The WHO, to answer this, conducted a systematic review of real-world evidence on vaccine effectiveness to provide some answers to these additional decision points to consider. The first was the real-world evidence of primary vaccination. How is the primary vaccination working? The systematic review, including more than 50 reports, showed that majority of our vaccines now demonstrate that a very high effectiveness rate of at least 85% against any infection and at least 90% against severe disease. Now, a lot of the worry on vaccine effectiveness was in the light of this Delta variant. And this may be allayed, this worry may be allayed by looking at these results on the review, that the studies that looked into our current vaccine effectiveness on the different variants showed that almost the effectiveness seems to be almost preserved even with the Delta variant. Although it's lower compared to the Alpha and wild strain, the current vaccine still showed some effectiveness at a rate of at least 85% against any infection and at least 90% against severe disease with the Delta variant. Now, all current platforms of vaccine provide at least 85% effectiveness rates against severe disease. And lastly, probably the most relevant in terms of boosting, whether to start a boosting program or not, is that when the effectiveness was assessed at a later time or a longer interval from the time of the primary vaccination, again, the systematic reviews showed that vaccine effectiveness rates remained at least 80% against infection and at least a very high 90% against severe disease. So based on all these considerations, in its August 10 statement, the WHO said that the evidence remains limited and inconclusive on any widespread need for booster doses following primary vaccination. They emphasize this in the context primarily of global supply constraints and inequities in vaccine distribution, even within countries. So our review also tried to identify these limitations in the evidence that WHO refers to. Now, while we have information that antibody titers post-boost really actually rise, and there is some information on its clinical effectiveness, there is still really no established correlates of protection, which will tell us at what level of antibody titers really equates to immunity from disease. We still don't know that, no? And we still don't know when is the best time to boost to get its maximum effect. As Professor Gloriani says, there is a factor of time interval when we can really get the maximum effect of the boost. And we don't know that time yet. Now, should we get the same vaccine, or should we be boosted with a different vaccine? No? Now, the long-term efficacy and safety boosters are still not known. The studies that I've showed you, the 21 studies, majority of them only had very short follow-ups of 1 month. No? And beyond the clinical effects of boosting, no, on the public health sphere, we don't know the overall impact of rolling out a booster program on achieving that maximum coverage of the primary vaccination. So we look forward to getting all this evidence, and evidence is really set to come out soon. No? We've looked at the registry on clinical trials, and there are 17 active trials on COVID-19 booster vaccination. And one is expected, among the 17, is expected to be completed as early as December 2021. No? And I'm sure when I look into the registry again tomorrow, there will probably be more reports on booster vaccination effects. No? And we are also awaiting that results locally, no, to give us the local evidence and data. We are awaiting the results of Dr. Nina Berba's group in PGH on the Philippine Vaccine Effectiveness Study, and one which focuses on healthcare workers. And I believe they are already analyzing the data. No? Now, there are also, I know, of many other ongoing local trials on COVID-19 vaccine, and some of these trials actually have a booster arm to them. So I think that it's a very exciting time as a researcher, because I mean, every day there's really new evidence that's coming up. So to match this effort, we will really make effort to seek all this evidence, summarize this, and inform our decision makers. And our group is really trying to work very hard to get these rapid reviews on time and get us out of this pandemic, to answer all these different questions that will eventually tell us, is it really time to boost, and how should we go about this booster vaccination program? So thank you, and I hope that gave us a little bit of more light.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carmela. Very, very important to note po para po sa ating mga audience, yung pong summary of findings sa grade table. It shows po yung the strength of the evidence, if it's certainty in terms of very low, moderate, or high. Makikita nyo po na use of boosters are safe, moderate po ang certainty po niya, and then with regards to immunogenic studies as well as the clinical outcomes preventing infections, medyo on the low side pa po siya. Please also note the WHO statement on kung pwede na po magpabakuna, especially do sa mga healthy, magpa-booster sa mga healthy individuals po, no? Given the global context of limited supply. So thank you so much, Dr. Lapitan. Excellent presentation. We now move on to our next presenter to be introduced by Dr. Susie.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond, and thank you very much, Dr. Lapitan. Of course, Raymond, I think one of the things we've always said in this webinar is that the information and the evidence is changing rapidly. And I remember in the early days of the pandemic, even on this webinar, doctors were doing everything, trying everything, every medicine. Kasi hindi nga alam, no? Hindi tiyak, so pinag-aaralan, no? So ito, I think we have to wait a little bit more. There is evolving evidence, but you know what we knew 6 months ago or a year ago is very different from what we know now. So it's very important to just keep abreast, na alam natin, hindi tayo nadadala ng balibalita, at dito sa webinar na to, sa kaya namin, parang tinutulungan namin kayo na na to be critical thinkers, to be able to say, okay, ito ang ibig sabihin nito. Di ba, wag natin pauunahin yung nararamdaman natin. gamitin natin yung ano no, yung husay yung husay at talino natin para mag-isip muna bago tayo mag-conclude na dapat ganito, dapat ganyan. Anyway, all right, it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce our next speaker, who I would say has one of the most difficult jobs. One of the most difficult jobs during a pandemic, where there are always new products being introduced into the market. And I've known him for some time, and it was a stroke of genius that he was put in the position that he is in. Kasi ano na lang mangyayari sa atin kung hindi siya ang ginawang Director General ng Food and Drug Administration. So it's my honor to welcome Dr. Rolando Enrique Domingo, Eric Domingo, the Director General and Undersecretary for the Food and Drug Administration. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Ma'am Susie. Ate Susie, nice to see you. Let me just share. Tama po yun.
Go ahead.
Napakahirap po talaga ng trabaho namin sa FDA ngayon. And ang mga produkto po bagong-bago. So let me just refresh everybody bago po tayo magtatalon at gustong magpa-booster. Paalala ko lang po sa inyo muna kung ano ba yung status ng mga bakuna na ginagamit natin. No? Ito po, before tayo nag-start magbakuna, pinapakita ko lagi yung slide nito to remind everybody that it usually takes several years, mga 5, 6, 7 taon bago makadevelop po ng isang bakuna, magsisimula sa discovery, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trial, hanggang marehistro ito. Pero dahil meron tayong pandemic, tayo ay nagbabakuna under emergency use authorization in the middle of phase 3. So a lot of the vaccines that we are using, binigyan po natin ng authorization yan, siguro mga 2 months, 3 months ang kanilang data na naibigay sa atin. No? At dahil nga po, hindi tayo dati nagbibigay ng gamot na hindi completely registered, tapos lahat ng clinical trials until phase 3, kailangan humingi pa tayo ng isang batas mula po sa ating Pangulo. No? We had Executive Order number 121, which grants the FDA Director General the authority to issue an emergency use authorization. Ang ibig pong sabihin nun, kailangan yung bakuna ay i-apply, no? Either ng private sector, kung sino yung developer ng bakuna, or ng Department of Health na nag-i-implement po ng vaccination, ng emergency use authorization kahit hindi pa po tapos ang mga pag-aaral sa development ng vaccine na yon. Kailangan good manufacturing practice at syempre mangangako naman sila no, na i-complete nila yung development ng vaccine. So sa ngayon po, ito yung criteria na ginagamit natin. So it should be reasonable to believe that the vaccine may be effective, the potential benefit outweighs the risk. So maganda yung safety profile at wala pa naman talagang approved na vaccine. No? At this time, wala pa po. Sa US, meron na yung Pfizer. Pero dito sa atin, wala pa. So all of the vaccines that we're using now show that the benefit outweighs the risk. Doon po sa data na binigay nila sa atin, which is the primary vaccination data. Meaning yung kanilang either 1-dose or 2-dose regimen. So, pag dinedevelop yung vaccine, no, ito yung kanyang tatapusin niya hanggang phase 3. Sa kalagitnaan ng phase 3, kapag nakita naman na talagang meron ng enough data no, to show safety and efficacy, binibigyan natin yan ng emergency use authorization. Kapag naman kompleto na yung data, natapos na talaga yung phase 3, pwede na siya mag-apply ng Certificate of Product Registration or a marketing authorization which will make it commercially available no, to the public. Sa ngayon po, Pfizer pa lang ang nakakuha sa US FDA ng Certificate of Product Registration or full approval. And that is based on 6 months clinical trial data. Sa ibang bansa po, katulad sa European Union, hindi pa sila nag-a-apply, kinukumpleto pa nila yung 1 year, and then after that, at saka pa po sila mag-a-apply sa mga bansa katulad natin. So ito pong full registration, possibly baka next year pa po yan, no, kung may mag-a-apply dito sa atin. Pero ngayon, ang binibigyan po natin pa rin ay EUA. And these are the vaccines that we have now under emergency use authorization. Memorize na po natin yan. Yung iba-iba lang yung brand name niya. Pero si Pfizer, siya rin si Comirnaty, si AstraZeneca, siya rin si Vaxzevria, Sinovac, Sputnik, Janssen, Moderna, Sinopharm, and yung Bharat Biotech na Covaxin. These are the 6 authorized vaccines in the Philippines right now. So yung 8, the 8. No? So yung pong ng 8 na yon, actually ang ginagamit pa lang natin 7. No? Yung Bharat Biotech, yung Covaxin, wala pang ginagamit sa Pilipinas. Pero yung 7 either nabili na natin or na-donate sa atin and we are currently using. Karamihan po yan, nung kumuha ng EUA sa amin, ang kanilang indication is of course prevention of COVID-19 using either a single dose in the case of Janssen and yung Sputnik Light, or 2 doses, lahat po yung iba. No? And then karamihan 18 and above. Yung Pfizer nung una 16 and above, at yung Sinovac nung una, binigyan po natin yan 18 to 59. Which we later expanded to older people. Tapos ngayon po, nagbigay na rin tayo for 12 to 17 for Pfizer and Moderna. So hindi po once kumuha ng EUA, yun na yun, nakataga na sa bato yun. Nagkakaroon ng bagong information, bagong data, and then they can ask for amendment to their EUA. So hindi rin po pwede na basta-basta na lang gagamitin ng bakuna sa isang bagong indication or bagong age group nang hindi po kinukuha ng approval from the FDA. Kailangan aaralin muna ng experts natin yan to make sure na yung bagong expanded indication is really supported, no, by information and by enough data. For example, nagkaroon ng change ng age. Yun pong Sinovac nag-increase ng 60 and older. Yun yung Pfizer and Moderna nag-start ng 12 and above. So after they got their EUA, nagpadala sila sa amin ng bagong data to show na pwede siyang gamitin sa ganitong edad para bigyan natin ng pahintulot na gamitin. They also ask for variation from us when they have a new manufacturing line. Ganun po tayo ka-strict sa good manufacturing practice. Bawat EUA nakalagay po doon kung saan factory ginawa yon, kung saan inilagay sa bote yon, at kung paano po makakarating dito sa Pilipinas. Kung magtatayo sila ng bagong factory, kailangan pakita nila sa amin ang data na yung factory na yon has good manufacturing practice and can consistently produce good quality vaccines. No? Pag nagbago siya ng variation ng bote, naging 2 doses, 1 dose, ampule, naging vial, bago rin pong data yan, papakita rin sa amin na it's as good as the original vaccine. And of course, ito talaga yung pong change in the dosing schedule. Kung magkakaroon ng change from 1 to 2 doses or 2 doses mag-i-increase po yan, no, to magbibigay ng booster, kailangan po yan maghingi sila ng amendment sa kanilang EUA bago po yan magamit. So pag na-decide po ng ating mga experts that it's time for boosters, kailangan po dadaan muna sila sa FDA. No? We have to do our regulatory part. The existing EUA shall apply for a product variation. Kasi magiging bago yung produkto niya, magkakaroon siya ng 3rd dose. No? Yung new generation vaccines, kung meron naman pong bago talagang bagong EUA po yun. No? And in any case, clinical data must be submitted to support the application. Hindi po pwedeng basta lamang na kasi ginagawa sa ibang bansa o kasi nakita na natin na yung mga antibodies ay tumataas, kailangan po mapakita natin yung clinical data to show na talaga pong merong benefit that outweighs the risk of giving a 3rd dose to a patient. Now, who will apply for a EUA? No? Ito yung medyo tricky kasi katulad ng sinabi ni Dr. Mela, no? Yung homologous vaccine or kung heterologous booster. If it's not going to be the same vaccine, no? For example, Sinovac or Pfizer, magdadagdag siya ng 3rd dose, I would expect the company mag-a-apply siya kasi gagamitin niya yung kanyang bakuna uli, dadagdagan niya ng 3rd dose. And they would probably have data to support that. No? Pero kung heterologous yung booster, for example, you got AstraZeneca or Sinovac ng first 2 dose, tapos ang gobyerno gustong magbigay ngayon ng Pfizer or Moderna as a 3rd dose, then it's very unlikely that the company will apply. No? Kasi hindi naman siguro sila mag-a-apply na ibang bakuna yung gagamitin para pang booster ng bakuna nila. Or gagamitin booster ang bakuna nila ng vaccine na hindi naman sila na mag-manufacture. So in this case, siguro yung other possible na applicant is other than the private industry would be the government. Then the Department of Health should be able to collate enough data, show us at the FDA that will be enough to convince our experts na oo, okay, ang heterologous booster, it's safe and the benefit outweighs the risk. And then of course, since these are still EUA vaccines and the new regimen with a booster, if gagawin natin yan, would still be something very new, then we will have to be very closely monitoring these patients. Kasi parang nag-umpisa ulit tayo ng vaccination natin. Kailangang bantayan natin yan and the EUA holder has very specific pharmacovigilance obligations. Kasi it's something new. And we just have to make sure that every now and then, i-review natin kung yung positive pa rin yung benefit and risk balance. So yun po ang sa FDA, no? And before I go, I have 30 seconds, gusto ko lang paalala sa lahat, yun po kasing pagkakaroon ng susceptibility or the probability of us getting COVID-19, hindi lang naman yun nakasalalay dun sa personal na protection ng antibodies ng katawan natin. No? Napakarami namang ibang paraan, including, of course, vaccinating and protecting everyone around us. So wag muna tayong tumalon agad, no, dun sa ating mga boosters. Kung yan ang vaccine natin ngayon under EUA pa, aaralin pa po talaga natin ang gusto yan. And once masatisfy lahat ng atin po mga requirements, then tsaka po tayo lang maaaring mag-booster shots. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Director General Undersecretary Eric Domingo from the Food and Drug Administration. Eric, thank you so much for that very enlightening presentation. I'm just listening to you, and while I'm listening to you, parang ang dami mo talagang iniintindi, no? Parang, it's not easy. It is not easy. And I think people are impatient. They want answers right away, but that's why we have an agency like the Food and Drug Administration, just to make sure na ligtas, no, ang mga gagawin, no, mga patakaran na gagawin natin ay ligtas. So napakahusay ng paliwanag ni Dr. Domingo. And Eric, thank you so much for the time that you spent to be with us. We know you're so busy. I understand at 2 o'clock you have to be at a hearing, but our frontliners really benefit from a bit more explanation, kasi kung naririnig lang natin sa radyo, may konti tayong nababasang news, hindi na uunawaan, no? Pero dun sa pinaliwanag nyo, napakalinaw na marami tayong kailangan daan ng proseso para matiyak natin na ang pagbibigay ng booster ay ligtas at karapat-dapat ang panahon. And I think the most important thing, although I don't wanna really go into this too long, is that you're right, no? The more people who get vaccinated, the more protected everybody is, no? So napakaganda nung mensahe nyo. I know you may have to leave early, but if you can, please stay, Eric, for the panel discussion. Okay, so we're gonna move to our next speaker. Raymond, over to you.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Director General Domingo, and thank you, Dr. Susie. Our final reactor for today will be, syempre, we've heard one from the perspective of a vaccine expert po, perspective of epidemiologists, and then from the FDA. Finally, we will have one from infectious diseases. She is an infectious disease specialist practicing at the Division of Infectious Diseases at the Philippine General Hospital. Please welcome to the webinar, Dr. Sonia Salamat. Dr. Salamat.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Marami po akong natutunan ngayon sa webinar na ito. Yung sasabihin ko po ngayon, wala naman po akong masyadong idadagdag na impormasyon doon sa nabigay na ni na Dr. Gloriani, Dr. Lapitan, Dr. Domingo. Pero andito ako para doon sa doon sa pananaw naman ng clinician. So, as a clinician, what's a clinician interested in? So, syempre, as clinicians, we're interested in having fewer people get sick. We're also interested in if people do get sick, we're hoping that they will not get sick with a severe or a critical illness with COVID-19. Tapos, syempre, we're interested in not getting sick ourselves. And also, if we don't get sick, that would also be very beneficial because we won't be passing on the infection to our loved ones, the people we live with, etc. So, Dr. Lapitan has already presented earlier the benefits of, the evidence about the benefits of receiving a booster or an additional dose of vaccine. And I think that was very clear to us. The evidence, the quality of the evidence right now is low to very low for the efficacy of the booster vaccines. And for the safety, it was at the quality of evidence was moderate. So pag tiningnan natin yon as clinicians, siguro we should be very we have to be aware that, again, the evidence is really evolving. And right now, as Dr. Domingo said, wag muna tayong tumalon kasi kung makikita naman talaga natin, hindi pa talaga maliwanag na kailangan na natin ng booster sa ngayon. I get a lot of questions also from colleagues that na sinasabi, oh, I got my antibody titers measured. So they do this either by using the ELISA format o kaya kahit yung rapid test lang kung negative o positive sila dun sa mga rapid antibody test kits. Tapos sasabihin nila, oh, bumaba na yung antibody, wala po akong slides, nakita ko po sa chat, no slides. So many people, many colleagues, many fellow doctors, fellow healthcare workers ask, my antibody titers are already waning based on the test I got, or I already have a negative test on the rapid test kit for antibodies. Shouldn't I get a booster now? The sooner, the better. So I think that's the temptation really for us to adopt a purely mechanistic point of view and say that, oh, okay, the moment our antibody titers fall, let's go and rush and get a booster. Pero I think that's where I hope this webinar has provided us clinicians with information that we need. Unang-una, di ba, si Dr. Gloriani emphasized that there is such a thing as immune memory, and therefore our immune response or our protection against COVID-19 does not solely depend on the antibody titers. Also, Dr. Lapitan also said in her presentation, I think everyone is also aware of this, but it's very easy to forget it when we are scared, especially during this time when there is a Delta variant surge. Dr. Lapitan mentioned that there are no established correlates of protection yet. So we don't really know what someone says, oh, my antibody titers fell maybe by half or something like that. We don't really know right now what antibody titer levels will protect us. So it doesn't make sense for us to just base our desire or our decision to get a booster just on the antibody titers. Kasi ngayon, ang isa pa kasing nangyayari, di ba marami nang nakapasok na vaccines na hindi na siya yung through the LGU, through the private companies na siya. Mukhang yon yung isang nagiging dahilan kaya ang dami ring nagtatanong kasi nagkaroon ngayon ng access to the vaccines that just arrived, and it's not anymore through the prioritization. Parang there's another way that fellow doctors, fellow healthcare workers can get vaccines, for example, through their families who are working in companies who got vaccines for them and their families. So even with that, even if tingin ko as a clinician, even with that access, so many people are asking me, oh, I have access through a patient, I have access through a member of my family. Should I get this booster? I think we have to go back. We have to go back to what everyone in this webinar has been saying. Kanina lang, kakasabi lang ni Dr. Eric Domingo, na we have to remember that it's not just ourselves that will play a role in ending this pandemic, but the fact that the more people get vaccinated, that will protect more people, and that's very important also. So we have to remember that it's not just about ourselves as individuals, but we have to keep our heads, we have to keep thinking about the bigger picture, because it's not just the healthcare workers or the frontliners. While we do, of course, the frontliners do a lot of the heavy lifting, but hindi kasi ganun lang yon. Talagang kailangan mas maraming taong mabakunahan, because think about it this way, that's also going to benefit the frontliners. The more people are vaccinated, the less people will fall ill, the fewer people will fall ill, the fewer people will be falling ill with a severe form of the disease. So that will protect us also, because there will be fewer patients that we will have to see in the hospital with COVID. That will also protect us. Our exposure will also fall. And those who get sick and are eventually hospitalized, hopefully they are not severely ill, and hopefully their viral loads will not be as high. That will also protect us, and that will also be beneficial to our other patients who are sick with diseases that's not COVID-19. Right now, they're also be suffering a lot because of the pandemic. Hindi sila makapasok ng ospital kasi puno ng COVID patients yung ospital. So kung titingnan natin yung bigger picture talagang mukhang hindi, unang-una, hindi pa maliwanag na kailangan natin ng booster. Tapos, pangalawa, kapantay nga din nung una, kailangan ng marami pang tao ng bakuna. Kaya parang hindi talaga tama na lulundag na nga tayo papunta dun sa booster samantalang ang dami pang hindi nababakunahan. Okay, siguro yun ang ating take home point dito sa webinar na to, na kahit syempre, natural naman na ayaw natin na magkasakit. Pero dapat din naman na tayo kasi rin yung tayo rin kasi as healthcare workers, tayo rin yung inaasahan na we should act rationally. We should act based on the evidence. Yun lang po. Salamat.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Dr. Sonia Salamat. Salamat kay Dr. Salamat. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. You know, Sonia, I just want to thank you, and I think our audience doesn't know this. Sonia manages COVID patients in PGH. She is really a clinician handling our patients in the COVID wards. And it was really very important to have you here, Sonia. I know you're busy, you're tired, and you've seen a lot, but really words of wisdom coming from you, from somebody who is currently managing COVID patients in PGH. So maraming salamat, Dr. Sonia, for joining us. All right, we are now going to move into our panel discussion. I'd like to call into the to open their webcams, Mamina, Mela, Eric, and Sonia. And while you're doing that, we're going to have a public service announcement from TVUP. Take it away.
Sigurado ka na ba sa reservations natin?
Oo naman.
Bakit bihis na bihis ka?
Oo, magiging escort mo ko eh.
Mukhang may date si Lolo't Lola.
Ilagay mo kaya ito?
Ang ganda naman.
Maganda yan. Special ang lakad natin. Ano, ready ka na?
Ready na. Mom, Dad, aalis si Lolo't Lola.
Oh, anak, after lunch.
Sa nalakad niyo po. Para sa atin lahat ito. Magpapabakuna kami dahil mahal namin kayo.
Dahil mahal ko kayo, magpapabakuna ako.
Okay, thank you TVUP for that video. It's part of our COVID communications public service announcement. It's one of the many outputs of the UP research on communicating COVID-19 in post-quarantine Philippines. It's headed by our UP Vice President for Public Affairs, Dr. Neni Pernia, and funded by the DOST-PCHRD and the Department of Health as part of the AHEAD HSPR project. Dr. Susie?
Okay, so we'll start now with our panel discussion. And I think Raymond's going to try to harvest some of the questions coming from the chat box. But let me get the ball rolling and just sort of ask everyone to comment on this thing about doing something. I really like Eric's message na dapat mabakunahan yung mas marami kasi pag mas maraming nabakunahan, lahat tayo protektado, no? So how can we get this message out? I think we're at the point where people are kind of kanya-kanya yung iniisip nila. Pero ano ang magandang gawin ng ating mga frontliners? Pag nagtanong, dapat ba magpa-booster ako? Ano dapat ang sagot nila? So let's start with Nina first, with Ma'am Nina Gloriani. Paano bang sasagutin yung tanong na yun na dapat ba akong magpa-booster?
I think all of us naman na nasa panel ngayon relate that the same sentiment that we have to vaccinate more of the global to kasi anywhere you are, pwede mong dalhin talaga itong virus na to, no? With all this mobility. So siguro yun yung dapat mas ma-ingrain sa atin as healthcare workers, that let us vaccinate as many muna as possible. Ang nagiging issue lang dyan, yung, well, what we hear from the private sector na na-offeran versus, ang hirap may mga issues that you have to consider. Pero if you are very clear on which one you should follow, then go for the greater good, meaning more of the, sa ngayon sa 18-20% lang ang ating immunization coverage. Malayo pa po tayo. Although nagdadatingan ng mga bakuna, with the Delta, tinaas na natin ang ating sana herd immunity na threshold. Hindi na 70%. Kung kakausapin lang kami, dapat 80-90% yan. 20% is a long way. So siguro ganun na lang sabihin natin, dapat madagdagan pa. Yun lang. Thank you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nina Gloriani. Let's hear from Mela. Mela, ano bang dapat sabihin? Kasi lumalapit ang mga tao dito sa mga audience natin at sinasabi, kailangan na namin magpa-booster. Bakit hindi? What do we say?
Well, same as well, number one, really, from an epidemiologist point of view, the information regarding the boosters, a lot of unanswered questions. What is the boost? What is the correct booster? When should you give it? So, and we want to maximize each and every dose of vaccine. So, I'd wait. When I was asked a question, will you get a booster? My answer will be, I'll give it to someone first who didn't have any vaccination yet, because that protects me and him, that other person, at the same time. When I get the booster, that only protects me. At least when you give it to someone who doesn't have a vaccine, dalawa kaagad yung prinotektahan mo. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Eric wants to say something.
Yeah, Eric, ikaw na.
Ako very specific na to kasi nabanggit na rin ni Sonia, ni Ma'am Nina, at saka nakita ko sa chat box. May tinatanong kasi yun nga mga ino-offer sa private sector. So ako ba ay magpapa-booster kung may ino-offer sa private sector? Naku, bawal po yun. Hindi po pwede. Just to be very, very clear and categorical about it. Ang vaccines under EUA are not commercially available. Ang maaari lang pong bumili nito, gobyerno. In fact, nakalagay po yun sa EUA na ini-issue ko sa bawat kumpanya. No? Sa gobyerno mo lang pwedeng ibenta yan. The government can designate partners to vaccinate. No? So minsan po, yung mga company na private, tumutulong sila sa DOH vaccination program at bumibili sila. But they have to follow the implementation program and guidelines of the DOH pa rin po. Nakalagay po yun sa kontrata nila, nakalagay yun sa EUA, at bago sila pumayagang bumili, kailangan mag-agree sila doon sa tripartite agreement na susunod sila sa DOH. So pag sinabi po ng DOH na hindi pwedeng booster, hindi po kayo pwedeng bumili at magpa-booster ng para sarili ninyo kahit kayong nagbayad dahil wala pa pong pwedeng bilhin na bakuna. Nakakapagod nga po, every now and then may ospital kaming maririnig na nag-o-offer ng ganyan or private company, pupunta pa yung aking enforcement unit doon at ipaalala sa kanila. Hindi nyo pwedeng ibenta yan at hindi kayo pwedeng magbakuna nang wala pa sa guidelines ng DOH. So sa atin po, tandaan na natin yun, hindi pa po pwede kahit po nagbayad tayo.
Thank you very much, Eric. Kasi hindi pwedeng kanya-kanya tayo magkakagulo yung buong Pilipinas pag ganyan Kaya meron tayong Department of Health, meron tayong FDA para parang pantay-pantay we have that everybody will have the same opportunity and that will help everyone. So I think Eric is very clear about this Bawal po yun. You're not supposed to have a booster. Okay, let's get some thoughts from Sonia. Dr. Salamat, what do you think? What would you say or what do you say to your patients?
Pag tinatanong ako, ang sinasabi ko talaga muna, wala pa talagang maliwanag na evidence na talagang okay magpa-booster. Tapos sinasabi ko rin na yung tungkol sa safety, baka gusto mo ring hintayin na na talagang makita yung evidence na safe siya. Pero kasi ang napapansin ko kasi, mas maganda kung magsisimula muna dun sa kung effective ba siya. Kasi kung sabihin mo sa kanila na, hindi pa naman natin sigurado kung effective yan talaga. Tapos pangalawa, yung sa side effects, hindi pa rin natin sigurado. Minsan nakikinig sila. Pero minsan, hindi din. Pero yun ang una kong sinasabi na tingnan natin yung evidence kasi karamihan kasi nung nagtatanong sa akin, mga healthcare workers din. Sinasabi ko na dapat nga tayo yung nauuna na tumitingin muna dun sa evidence kasi paano naman tayong papaniwalaan kung tayo mismo, para sa akin kasi parang rin yan parang jumping the queue din yung bigla kang magpapa-booster kasi nakakuha ka na nung share mo dati tapos kukuha ka na naman ulit. So isa pa yon, na pangatlo ko yon na sinasabi na teka lang, parang pandaraya na yan, nakarami ka na, hindi pa yan para sa iyo, hindi pa yan para sa atin, para muna yan dun sa hindi na bakunahan. Yun ang sinasagot ko.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And I think Eric's point is, bawal. Hindi dapat magpa-booster, okay? So I think, so of course, when you're trying to explain, so you're also explaining all the other things. But right now, as far as the Department of Health and the FDA is concerned, bawal siya. Okay, so I think we're very, very clear on that. Okay, Raymond, I think we have some questions from our audience. Go ahead.
Yes, so very, very first question lang po, no? A lot of the questions, we now have 36 questions po sa Q&A box. Pero halo-halo po siya Ang pinaka dominant po talaga na question is about mix and match. Ano po ba yung mix and match na tinatawag? Pag nagpabakuna po ba kayo ng primary na Sinovac, tapos yung third dose ninyo is another vaccine brand, is that mix and match already? I think that's something that has to be clarified po I don't know who wants to, maybe DJ Eric or Dr. Nina would like to say. Para lang po malinaw to our audience po. DJ Eric.
Si Ma'am Nina yan, kasi sa amin po sa FDA, walang registered na mix and match vaccine. Ang bawat vaccine nagpapa-register lang siya ng complete regimen ng kanyang bakuna at yun lang yung data na meron kami. Kaya hindi po kami talaga maka-advise na mag-mix and match ng vaccine sa FDA.
Sa Pilipinas, wala pa po tayong data dyan, no? Although magkakaroon ng mix and match study, yung in-announce namin, kaya lang hindi pa po makapag-umpisa. But we have data from UK, Spain, and Scotland on AstraZeneca and Pfizer. Malinaw po doon na yung pag nabigyan ng baliktara, no? Astra, Pfizer, Pfizer, Astra, mas tumataas yung antibody response, pero pagka din heterologous na vaccination, kagaya sinabi ni Dr. Mela kanina, yung mas marami din na nagre-report ng side effects, although still mild to moderate. So yun yung titignan ninyo. Kaya hindi lang yan, tataas ba antibody ko? Mabubus nga ba ako? You also have to consider yung safety. Kasi alam nyo, may binabantayan din sa mga bakuna, hindi lang sa COVID, yung pwedeng magkabibigay ng maraming doses, yung pwedeng ma-enhance din yung disease. Meron po din tayong minomonitor na magaganon. Kaya yung safety ay kailangan din pong bantayan. Ngayon yung Sinovac, meron siyang very limited data na nabigyan ng AstraZeneca for a second dose. Mas mataas nga yung naging immunogenicity nga, yung antibody, versus Sinovac. So Sinovac and Astra, but very limited pa rin yung ganong mga pag-aaral. So hintayin natin yung sa atin kasi mga Pilipino ang sasali dyan sa mix and match study natin na sana mag-umpisa na. So lahat ng bakuna na meron tayo, nakalista dyan na Sinovac, bibigyan ng Astra, Sinovac, bibigyan ng Pfizer, Moderna, ewan ko kung nakahabol ang Janssen, and then maybe Sputnik.
Okay, so antayin natin, yung mga dalubhasa nandito po sa webinar ngayon. You're hearing it from the head of the vaccine panel for the Philippines, vaccine expert panel. So antayin po natin. I know people are impatient, they want to know more, but everything is new, and so our experts are excellent. They are excellent. Napakahusay po nila. Naririnig nyo sila, nakikita nyo sila. Hindi po nila papabayaan kainin ng buhaya mga Pilipino, you know what I mean? We have to trust that they're going to do their due diligence, they're going to study before anything is made, what should I say, is made into a policy or a program. Raymond, I think we have do we have a live question?
We have one member of the audience who will be asking live. Sir Camilo Nogoy. Please go ahead, sir, with your question.
Hi, good afternoon po. Tatanong ko lang po if there's really a difference between a third primary shot and a booster. Kasi I think I heard it in a discussion sa US CDC na what they're giving the immunocompromised in the state is not a booster but a third primary shot. Kasi 2 doses of the primary shot, they were not enough to give a good number of antibodies for the immunocompromised. So I'm just wondering if there's really a difference between the two.
May I answer that? Okay, that is why we have to define, no? Ano ba ang third shot on a 2-dose regimen or magbo-boost ka pa? Now, some of the vaccines we have for routine immunization are based on 3 doses. Nari hepatitis A, hepatitis B, mga OPV na yan, no? Because that was how they were able to find yung optimum immune responses. They tried, of course, 1 dose, 2 dose, and then 3 doses. Now, in this pandemic, medyo kulang siguro yung time. So, hindi lahat ng vaccines. We were all eager to deploy vaccines dahil meron silang sufficient evidence na safe, immunogenic, tumaas na yung antibody, and then effective naman, ano? Pero may nag-emerge na data na it could be that some of these vaccines na 2 doses lang would actually require 3 as a primary. So actually yung Sinovac, meron silang parang sinasabi na gano'n, and if Pfizer is saying that also. So iba-iba yan, no? But all of this, tataas talaga kasi 3rd dose. So it's up to them to actually say na, oh, kasi pwede naman din, that's how they will also sell yung kanilang recommendations. Sorry ha, but it's not just sometimes the technical, we also look at like, yung nagsesell na 1 dose lang to, we have seen data na pag nag 2 doses itong bakuna na to, talagang mas mataas. So why would I give 1 dose? Kung nakita ko may 2 doses na data, I would choose that. Pero of course, kanya-kanya din yan. No? So pwedeng 3rd dose siya or primary series. It's up to us to see. Ganun.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Nina. Anyone else want to reply, Raymond, on that?
I think none, but I think there's one of the, well, the second po na in terms of category na mga questions with regards to enforcement, I think. One of the questions here coming from Grace Nunez is, may liability po ba ang doktor at ang nagpatusok o nagpabakuna kapag nagbakunahan siya ng bakuna na wala pang EUA? And the other one is, there are many anecdotes na nagpabakuna na po ng one brand and then going to a private company and then nagpabakuna naman ng other brand. What's the FDA doing about it daw po?
Yung sa dispensing, ang meron kaming meron kaming habol. Pag nahuli namin na nagbibigay ng bakuna na hindi sumusunod sa guidelines, then we can always give sanctions. Yung tao na nagpabako dito sa atin kasi yung uminom ng gamot na fake, uminom ng fake na counterfeit, yung hindi naman natin sila kinakasuhan o hinahabla. No? Yun naman nasa sariling kusa na natin at saka siguro naman nasa konsensya na natin yun, knowing na pag kumuha tayo ng extra vaccine, nagde-deprive tayo ng isa pang tao ng bakuna na dapat mapunta sa kanya at alam natin na 80% sa kababayan natin wala pang bakuna. So yun pong pag meron na lang po silang nakukuling ganon na nag-dispense na through outside of the guidelines, they can report to us and yung nakuhuli po natin yan.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Eric. No, I think again, and I've seen it in the chat. No, somebody put there, it's selfish to want a booster or to do it illegally or whatever. No, so ito panawagan lang well, I know you who are watching on this webinar are not doing this. You're hearing about it. So I think talaga pag may pandemic, people are really anxious. They really want, they start thinking about themselves only. But our main message is we need more people to be to be vaccinated so that everyone gets protected. Okay, Raymond, do you have some more questions? Are we going into evaluation already?
Well, a few more questions, Dr. Susie, but I would like to hear from Dr. Gloriani. It's about people who have received their first dose, but the interval pagkatapos po ay parang lumagpas than the recommended. Lumagpas ng 28 days, lumagpas ng ganyan. Let's say it's month 3 from the first dose of Sinovac. What is normally the guidance for all of these people po, just for the benefit of our audience, ma'am?
All of these vaccines, may kanya-kanya silang clinical trial studies, no, data. So yun yung naging basehan ng kanilang interval. But from an immunologic perspective, if you recall, ang hepatitis B vaccine, yung kanyang second and third doses, primary series, 3 siya. Mas mahaba yung interval between the second and third dose kasi dalawang regimen sa hepatitis B. Isang 0, 1, 2, so monthly, 3. O yung isang regimen, yung third dose ay 5 months from the second dose or 6 months from the first dose. And what we have seen for hepatitis B, yung nabigyan ng 016 ay mas mataas ang level ng antibody and data yan na matagal na meron, no? And mas matagal ang magiging duration ng antibody response. Kaya kung nagmamadali yung mga, let us say, healthcare workers, gusto nila tumaas agad, yes, they will follow the 0, 1, 2 monthly. Pero kung hindi, kasi ang durability ng immunity will be better for the one with the longer. Now, having said that, now, remember, among these vaccines, ang meron talagang data na long interval ay ang AstraZeneca. Kasi, bakit? Actually, hindi naman initially nakasulat sa study protocol na yan. Pero may mga na-delay na hindi dumating para sa kanilang second dose. And lo and behold, yung mas mahaba, naka 12 weeks from the first dose, mas mataas ang titer. Parang serendipitous in a way, no? Then meron pa silang additional study na later pa, after the first dose, mataas pa rin ang antibody response, no? So, but we cannot say that for the others, pero generally speaking, the longer the interval, as I mentioned in my presentation, mas marami. Kasi nga yung B cells, dumadami, plasma cells, mas mataas ang antibody na. Pero you can only do that so much. Hindi rin pwedeng 1 taon after. Hindi rin pwedeng gano'n. Siguro mga 3 to 6 months will be fair enough.
Okay, parang Raymond, no? Pagka may nagnanag sa'yo, hindi umaandar, di ba? Parang paano na lang, medyo okay, di ba? Parang merong pagitan. Kasi pag paulit-ulit, parang naarinde. Okay, Raymond, let's go to answering our fun quiz.
Okay.
Before we ask our speakers to give their closing remarks. Go ahead.
Sige, fun quiz. There we go. Okay. Actually, we have one more question but for the FDA. Later na lang po after this fun mini quiz.
Go ahead.
The first question po, this one came from Dr. Gloriani, Ma'am Nina. A booster is option A, additional dose given after the primary series. Option B, given immediately after the second dose if the person has comorbidities. Option C, given to the elderly. And option D, all of the above. What's the correct answer, ma'am? Ma'am Nina.
First one.
The first one, okay.
I define that.
Okay, that's the one with the most naman po from at least for our respondents. So a booster dose is an additional dose given after the primary series, answered by at least 62% of our respondents sa Zoom. And then for the second question comes from Dr. Lapitan, the evidence of effectiveness of booster shots for COVID-19 vaccines is number 1, option A, not available. Option B, consistently increasing the antibodies. Option C, inconsistent. And option D, confusing. Mamela?
Ayun, consistently increasing the antibodies, but that is for today. It may change tomorrow, so let's watch the evidence.
Thank you po. Thank you so much for that. So for those who are would want to test their knowledge again, please go ahead with the answering the opinion poll again po. Okay. I think the one of the questions that I'm seeing po at least sa Q&A is for the FDA again for DJ Eric. Sir, in other countries, specifically developed countries po, no, the USA has given select vaccines their full CPR. When do we anticipate to have that in the country, sir?
Yeah, so one lang, no, one pa lang tong vaccine to be very precise about it. Pfizer pa lamang at sa US FDA pa lamang. Tinanong ko na rin sila kung kailan sila mag-a-apply dito sa atin, no. But ang sagot nila, kino-complete pa nila. I mean, they start I think with EU and then the other countries like us. So ako ang nakikita ko siguro first quarter of next year pa possibly may mag-apply ng EUA sa atin, no. And not only Pfizer, no, the other vaccines na nag-start din yung kanilang maaga nag-start yung kanilang trials like Moderna, Janssen, maybe Sinovac. Itong mga nauna siguro by early next year mag-apply na.
Sir, for the benefit of our audience, what does it mean to have a full CPR, sir?
It means na talagang na-complete nila yung clinical trial, no? Lahat ng endpoints ay napakita nila at talagang very clear yung safety at saka efficacy data. And then we allow it to be commercially available. So maibebenta na ito ngayon, mabibenta na po sa butika, sa mga ospital, makakabili na tayo. Hindi na sa government lamang ang daan ng bakuna, kundi magiging accessible na rin siya through the private.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. That's very clear, no? So hopefully by next year, maybe we might see a CPR for the vaccines. We don't know. So abangan niyo po, no? And that's the point of this whole webinar series, no? Sabi nga natin kanina, napakabilis ng pagbabago ng impormasyon. Kailangan sabayan natin, no? Sabayan natin. Okay, so I think we are going to go to our we're going to give our panelists a minute or two to think about your closing remarks, like your message for our audience who are mainly frontline workers from all over the country. You can see from the district hospitals, from DepEd, from provincial hospitals, from the private hospitals, from the Metro Manila hospitals, and from abroad, our Filipino healthcare workers who come to this webinar to be updated. So we're going to give you a few minutes to think about closing remarks. And while we're doing that, Raymond's going to field an evaluation. Raymond, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Susie. TVUP, we have it on the screen. So again, wala po tayong inilalabas na separate na evaluation. Ito na po yung evaluation na ito, especially for those who are asking not just in the chat but have been sending direct messages at sa ating mga email. We have 5 questions answered using a Likert scale. The 5 questions read, the panelists demonstrated thorough knowledge of the topic. Number 2, the panelists well prepared and organized. Number 3, the panelists spoke clearly and audibly. Number 4, the panelists used appropriate language with technical medical jargons adequately explained. And number 5, the panelists contributed to new perspectives and knowledge on managing various key COVID-19 health issues. So we are seeing more and more of our respondents answering ating evaluation poll. Lumagpas na po ng 800 ang ating respondents. We will not be closing this evaluation poll as we move on to the final messages of our panelists.
Okay, thank you so much, Raymond, and for everyone, please continue to fill in the evaluation form. That helps us. That really helps us understand. And if you have suggestions on how things can be made better, you always have the chat box here. You know, suggestions about topics and so on. We always welcome that. So let's hear our closing remarks, or no, not the closing remarks. I'm sorry, our parting words from our panelists. So we'll start with Dr. Sonia Salamat of PGH. Sonia, please go ahead.
Siguro po ang parting words, let's always keep abreast of the evidence. Let's not jump the gun. Wag po tayong masyadong excited. Lagi nating tandaan. Tingnan muna natin yung evidence. Tapos siguro gusto ko ring sabihin din yung, kasi nakita ko sa chat, sabi nga ni Dr. Isa Alejandria, si Ma'am PSMID President, sabi nga ni Ma'am, gusto ko rin yun na ipaalala ngayon, hindi lang naman bakuna ang kailangan natin tayo na mga frontliners, healthcare workers, huwag nating kalimutan, lagi tayong dapat na may personal protective measures, tapos lahat po ng dapat na ginagawa natin sa workplace natin, dapat yan lahat ginagawa natin. Let's not be short-sighted and just focus on getting a booster for ourselves. Yun lang po.
Thank you very much. Undersecretary Eric Domingo. Eric, go ahead.
Alam ko po lahat tayo ninenervyos tsaka gustong proteksyonan yung sarili natin. Pero talaga naman pong inuna ng pamahalaan ng mga health workers tsaka mga vulnerable senior citizen na bakunahan kasi sila yung kailangan talagang proteksyonan. Beyond equity, beyond everything else, kahit po nakita ko sa evaluation, akala nyo lahat alam namin, naiintindihan namin, napakarami pa po nating hindi alam. Kaya po hindi pa tayo nagbo-booster at hindi pa po nagbibigay ng booster kasi hindi pa po kumpleto ang data. At pag meron naman po nakita natin na convincing yan, ibibigay naman po agad yan sa inyo. No? Pero sa ngayon, konting hintay pa po. Let's just make sure safety and efficacy first.
Thank you very much. That's Dr. Eric Domingo, the head of the FDA. Let's go to Dr. Mela Lapitan of the Clinical Epidemiology Unit, National Institutes of Health of UP Manila. Go ahead, Mela.
Well, rest assured, we are really working very, very hard to get all the evidence out there so that we can properly inform everyone, and especially our decision makers, on what to do and how to get us all out of this pandemic. So, but yeah, let's all keep abreast and make sure that we rely on good evidence to decide on our next steps as we fight this pandemic. That's all.
Thank you very much, it's Dr. Mela Lapitan. Okay, Ma'am Nina Gloriani, please
Yung
go ahead.
matanda daw ang sa huli.
Hindi, yung nauna. Yung nauna kasi ganun kabaliktad tayo eh. Oo.
No. I'm just joking. Taking off from what I actually presented, no, wag tayong magmadali. Kasi meron tayong memory, then we just, siguro sasabihin ko, baka yung hindi pa nakaka-second dose, magpa-second dose na kayo kasi you will need a better protection. I cannot promise you it's full protection, but it's better protection kung makukuha nyo yung second dose and remind the others. And like what the others said, yung minimum public health precautions, we cannot stop this pandemic kapag hindi natin in-stop ang virus transmission. So vaccines will only work partially or will only protect to some extent, pero kasama lahat po yan. So yun, huwag magmadali. Yun ang final message ko. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Words of wisdom from the head of the vaccine expert panel of the country. All right. For our closing remarks, so thank you very much to all our panelists who are so busy, but you gave us the time of day, and I think our audience is very grateful to hear, more than 2 minutes from you, but really an explanation. Maraming salamat po. And to do a synthesis, we have the Dean of the UP College of Medicine, Dr. Charlotte Chiong, who will give us our synthesis and closing remarks. Thank you. Charlotte, go ahead.
Thank you, Susie. So again, we are about to conclude webinar 71. Ano nga ba ang COVID-19 boosters? This session has given us very important learnings this afternoon. Dr. Nina Gloriani defined boosters as being given after a primary series of vaccines to refresh the immune system's memory after so many months. Depending on the type of vaccine, intrinsic host factors, vaccine and administration factors, and even factors like existing immunity or pre-existing immunity. She said that immune responses really vary according to QQD, quality, quantity, duration. And with boosters, we can increase the potency, avidity, affinity, and the breadth. So the need for boosters really depends on immunity after a primary response and a secondary response that generates memory cells with repeated exposure longer and stronger. More B cells can clonally expand with time and longer between interval doses. So wait for the right time to boost. A highly shifted immune system response was seen in a study of 171 complex cases of SARS-CoV-2 with B-cell clonal turnover. Dr. Mela Lapitan from the Clinical Epidemiology Unit did rapid reviews of 21 studies on boosters that really showed evidence for about 11% additional protection with respect to an increase in antibody titers. She also mentioned 3 single cohort studies that showed no breakthrough within 1 month in patients who were dialyzed for those without boosters. So therefore, having a booster vaccination, at least in that subset of patients, gave some advantage. So within 1 month, we expect local and systemic effects that are mild. Lower adverse event rates in several studies were shown. Heterologous studies are higher, but are local and in generally mild effects. And boosters, as she showed, are definitely safe. There's low quality of evidence regarding effectivity and very low evidence regarding boosters being immunogenic, mainly because the studies were short-term and mostly observational. There are other pieces of evidence, such as the real-world experience on vaccine effectiveness with greater than 90% effectiveness against severe disease and more than 85% against all the variants. And a Lancet study by Cross et al. Showed limited evidence on the need for booster because of the global supply constraints and equity of vaccine access. This is something that should wait for better evidence. So we look forward to the UPPGH vaccine effectiveness trials, the 17 ongoing trials, and other local COVID-19 vaccine trials. The next speaker, our Director General from FDA, Dr. Eric Domingo, actually presented us the Executive Order 121, Series 1, 2020, that actually authorized his office, the FDA, to issue the Emergency Use Authorization, the EUA. He mentioned that there's data to expand vaccination to cover 12 years and above, and this was true for Moderna and Pfizer. But amendments will be needed if we are going to go for third dosing. And therefore, clinical data will need to be presented to the FDA for a third homologous vaccine or even a heterologous booster to be approved. And therefore, when such data are available, they still have to monitor what you call post-authorization monitoring. So individual susceptibility will also depend not only on on individual immunity, but actually vaccinating everyone. I think that was a very important point. So the reactor for this afternoon was our very own infectious disease expert, Dr. Sonia Salamat, who gave the perspective of a clinician who actually treated patients with COVID-19 infections at the PGH. And she mentioned that, again, we have to be able to wait for more evidence and wait for authorities to approve rather than go for that booster, even if available in some private companies, for example. So I think the message has been that we have to have everyone vaccinated. Sama-sama tayong umahon sa hamon ng pandemya, magpabakuna na, at wag lang pang sarili ang iisipin, kundi ang pambansang kapakanan ang isipin. Sa komunidad po ang laban ng COVID. So kung maaari ay mag-ingat tayong lahat, magpabakuna na yung hindi pa nababakunahan, magpa-second dose na yung hindi pa nagpapa-second dose, at sumunod tayo lahat sa mga minimum public health standards. So I'd like to thank, of course, the opportunity to do the synthesis and closing remarks. Thank you, of course, to the organizers, TVUP, led by the Office of Vice President Elena Pernia, TVUP Executive Director Dr. Gigi Alfonso, our hosts, Dr. Susie Pineda and Dr. Raymond Sarmiento, and our distinguished speakers, all alumni of the UP College of Medicine, our mentor, Dr. Nina Gloriani, my colleague, Dr. Mela Lapitan, Dr. Eric Domingo, as well as Dr. Sonia Salamat. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much. That's the Dean of the UP College of Medicine, Dr. Charlotte Chiong. It's always challenging to try to bring everything together, but Charlotte, you and Menchit really are really good at summarizing everything. Thank you so much for that, Dean Charlotte Chiong. All right, so next week, nako, exciting na naman. Lagi naman exciting ang topic natin, di ba? But I think many of you are interested in this because many of you have children. We are going to talk about COVID-19 vaccines for children in 12 to 17 years old. We will have experts from the pediatric sector, and we also have an epidemiologist. So we will also have a pediatrician from another country who will talk where they are giving vaccines for children 12 to 17 years old. So abangan nyo po. No? Also, I know a lot of DepEd. We have so many folks from DepEd from all over the country who tune in. Sama po kayo, isama niyo po yung mga ibang taga-DepEd, mga kasama niyong mga teacher, yung mga interesado, because we will talk about COVID-19 vaccines for children. Over to you, Raymond.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susie. Really an excellent synthesis and closing remarks from our Dean from the UP College of Medicine. We are now showing po the results of our evaluation poll. 1,122 of our respondents were able to put in their feedback. For the most part, more than 90%, tama ba? More than 93%, 93% and above po ang mga sumagot po ng strongly agree dito po sa ating evaluation poll. Very, very consistent with our previous webinar. So maraming salamat po sa lahat. Before we conclude our program, let me first acknowledge the very hardworking team behind the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series. Without each and every one of you, our learning series will not be possible. Maraming salamat po. And then for those who are asking, paano po ba sila makakapanood ulit ng mga naklaktawan po nila ng mga webinars, you can go to www.youtube.com, search for the TVUP channel, and you'll be able to see all previous 70 webinars natin, including yung archive po nitong webinar na ito as soon as our webinar is concluded. So, yun po, magkita-kita po tayo ulit next week. Very exciting topic on COVID-19 vaccines and children. But for now, we formally close our webinar. We look forward to your company next week, Friday. Again, our regular Friday lunch date from 12 noon to 2 p.m. It's a date.
Together, we can stop COVID deaths.
So keep safe, keep healthy, and see you online.
The enemy remains unseen. I'll keep your hand in mine. Let's say a prayer one more time. I know you long for home, but I am here, you're not alone. I'll stay with you until the coast is clear. The others pain before my fears, the others laugh before my tears. But right behind the mask, I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? My God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'm here to hold the line. I'll keep my word until my time. Look into my eyes and say his name to realize it's fine to be afraid. Just hold on to the word he gave. This time will come to pass, 'cause this salvation's made to last. He'll carry you to see the break of day. The others pain before my fears, the others vows before my tears. But right behind the mask, I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? My God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'm here to hold the line. I'll keep my word until my time. The others pain before my fears, the others laughs before my tears. But right behind the mask, I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? My God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'll keep my word, your word is mine. The others pain before my fears, I'm pushing on despite the tears. Please take us through another day. Just hold my hand, and I will hold the line. will hold